it.
Let's talk about what the 3rd Armored Division did in battle, its particular role. Maybe, let's say, before they encountered the German Panther, since that's a transitional point in your story. Was the 3rd Armored Division at the front of the forward advance, or where were they on the battlefield?
Well, this was a division that was formed up a little bit late in the war. It came into Normandy several weeks after the D-Day invasion, so they weren't exactly the first on Omaha Beach. They hadn't fought in Sicily or Africa like the 1st Armored Division, Old Ironsides. They were kind of latecomers to it, but they had a good general. His name was General Maurice Rose. He was this hard-charging general who was like a Patton, but different. He wasn't getting the press that Patton was getting because Rose was literally in combat with his men. When they would come to a bridge that had been knocked out or they didn't know if the tanks could go across, Rose would walk across it under German mortar fire, under machine gun fire to test the bridge himself to say, come on, there's no reason for not crossing this bridge. Let's go. There were times when he'd jump out of his Jeep and chase down Germans with his pistol when he saw them running in the field next to the advance. I mean, this guy was a gung-ho officer, so they had him at the helm. He gave his unit the name Spearhead, and this unit really spearheaded the advance out of France, across Belgium. They ended up encircling a German army that was trying to escape France after France fell, and so they round up a whole bunch of Germans there. Then they lead the charge. They're the first unit to capture a German town. They break through the West Wall. They're sent to the Battle of the Bulge in relief. Later on, they're given the mission of spearheading the advance into the heart of Germany, into the Rhineland, toward the city of Cologne. And after they cross the Rhine, they're sent basically to spearhead the way to Berlin. I mean, this is an incredible unit. And the gunners are incredible people, and the tank men, and yet nobody's heard of them. And that was the most baffling thing to me. And it's because there was a reason for this, and that was the Spearhead Division was often behind enemy lines. And so what does that mean? It means that war reporters are not able to send back cables. Hey, today we're behind the Rhine River by 50 miles driving on the city of Paderborn. No, they couldn't do that. They couldn't talk about what the division was doing, what tanks it was knocking out, where it was going, because it was just such a hard-charging division. Now, Patton's army, the 3rd Army, well, you can talk about an army. You can report on blood and guts. You can report on what they're doing because an army is pretty hard to hide. An army is usually not behind enemy lines. And so these two units are often confused, the 3rd Armored Division and the 3rd Army. 3rd Armored Division, think of it as a shock force, almost like the 101st Airborne.
That's an interesting point you make that I just thought of, that in looking at 20th century military history, you have to disentangle the actual military importance of a group from media, which you don't have to do in earlier centuries, where people just assume, oh, whatever Patton did was the most important because he got all the press. But if he's a person who is just ready-made for a reporter and a reporter's dream because he's so quotable, he's such a colorful figure that it's hard to overestimate what he does. Kind of like in the way that people assume, oh, the person who's doing the most for science in the 21st century is Neil deGrasse Tyson, even though he almost publishes nothing because he's so busy with media appearances. Not to denigrate him, but that's just simply not what he does. He's not a research scientist. So this is a good thing you pointed out there, that we can overstress the importance of a figure in total military significance just by media accounts. What leads up to, with the 3rd Armored Division, they encounter the German Panther, which slows this advance. How successful were they before they encountered the Panther, and what were the technological components of the Panther that made it so difficult for them?
We really first met the Panther in Normandy, and it was a German medium tank, but it was actually really like a heavy tank. The Panther had this one chief attribute that we didn't expect, and it was this slanted frontal armor. The Germans were just engineering masters. And it also became their downfall because they became over complex, and they made tanks that were too good and that would break down too easily. And this Panther tank had this slanted frontal glacis armor that was at least 6 inches thick. The thing is, though, when you laid 6 inches on a slant, it gains additional thickness. And so we found out that our Sherman tanks were coming up against this Panther, and literally every shot was bouncing off. They took Panthers that they captured in Normandy out in the field, and they tested them after the battle. And they found out that it wasn't a distance thing. They would shoot a Panther at 500 yards, couldn't break through its frontal armor. They would shoot it at 200 yards. They couldn't do it. They couldn't do it at 100 yards. From no distance could the average American Sherman, which was armed with a 75 millimeter gun. It was a very underpowered gun. And that was a problem. We had this quantity over quality mentality, almost the opposite of the Germans. And we rushed over to Europe, all these Sherman tanks. Now, they're smaller tanks. They're narrow. They can fit on troop transports. They've got a gun that is versatile. It's 75 millimeters. That you can use it as artillery, firing skyward. You can use it to knock out pillboxes, supporting infantry, and you can use it to knock out tanks. So we had the gun for everything, except it couldn't knock out the Panther at any distance. The German Panther, however, had a 75 millimeter gun, but theirs was chambered very differently. It wasn't made for shooting as artillery or knocking out pillboxes. It was made for killing tanks. And so this thing had a massive, long 75 millimeter, they called it a super velocity gun, and a super velocity shell. Shell was packed with powder. It was almost double the length of our Sherman shell. And so this thing could just fly for 2,000 yards on a rope. There was almost no need when you're a Panther gunner to calculate for distance. You didn't have to elevate your gun and calculate for an arc and the trajectory. You just point and click. And so this Panther is deadly. I mean, it can knock you out before you can barely see it. It can shoot on a rope. And then if you do hit it, your shell's going to fly skyward. So our tankers had to really improvise. And this is where they say the courage of the American tanker really changed the course of battle, because they're going in with an inferior machine. And yet, how do they triumph? One of the ways that General Rose later said was our men were superior gunners, partially because they had the guts to hold their fire and maneuver around the enemy until they could get in a position to do damage. The reason was the Panther tank was vulnerable from the sides and the rear. And so what you had to do was you had to work with your buddies. A whole tank platoon, we're talking 15 tanks, would have to go and take on, a company is 15 tanks. A platoon is 5 tanks. So the 5 of you, or maybe your whole company, would have to go surround this Panther. And the way you did that was you had to bite your lip, you had to pray, and you had to try to drive around the thing. And that's why the Spearhead Division became the bloodiest American tank unit of World War II. Bloodiest as in they probably killed the most, but they also lost the most. They lost the most tanks because that's the price you paid when you were out in front.
Hey everyone, Scott here. We're going to take a very short break for a word from our sponsors.
I'd like to hear more about this period of asymmetrical tank warfare. I think it's with the breaching of the West Wall and the Battle of the Bulge. Is that when they're fighting against these Panther tanks with theirs that are technologically inferior? And do they use these methods that you just described here where they have to flank them or go around them?
There was a new problem encountered when our tanks broke into Germany, and that was the war had turned, and the Germans knew it. So the Germans are now on the defensive. They know the Americans are coming. They know we're entering their homeland. So the advantage suddenly goes to the enemy. In tank warfare, they say 70% of the time, the tank that sees the other one first is going to win. So in other words, it's all about spotting your enemy first. 70% of the time, the odds are in your favor that your crew is going to live and the other crew is going to die. The challenge is when you are attacking into Germany, the German tanks are able to camouflage. A Panther tank is able to sit on a hillside or in a nest of trees or in the ruins of a house or in a village, and they're able to pick off the first American tank that comes around the bend or over the hill. And so for an American tank crewman, leading was a death sentence. When a man would be asked to lead, they would rotate for one. Nobody wanted to do this every day. Clarence's tank commander used to come back and he would smoke a pipe, and the pipe would literally be chattering in his teeth. It would be bouncing up and down. His jaw was shaking because he knew they were going to lead that day. And so, that was a trouble of leading the charge into Germany. And Clarence, he was using a Sherman tank for most of the war, but at one point they got a Pershing tank, and we can talk about that later. The Pershing, one of the first sent to the ETO. The downside was when he got that Pershing, it was time for them to lead every attack. And so it just begs this question of how do you survive when the odds are against you, when the first American tank is always going to get hit? And part of that was Clarence's special ability, and part of it was just the guts to saddle up. I mean, these are John Wayne types. I don't know if this kind of warfare would exist today. I say that because we all value our lives a lot. We all think we're special. We all think we're above it all. How many of us would say, okay, I'll be the first one. I'll lead the tank column down the road today. And yeah, I'll drive into that hidden German Panther that's waiting in an ambush, and I'll be the one to take the first shot. I mean, the guys back then had guts. And then the trouble was, once that German tank knocked out the first American, or maybe the second too, it would relocate, and you'd have to do it all over again. And so that was a German tactic. Knock out one tank and then get the heck out of there. Move your Panther back, find a new place to hide, and let them drive into you again. So the charge into the heart of the Third Reich was bloody and desperate, and my hat's off to the guys who lived it.
How did Clarence survive? Was he lucky that his number wasn't called first in these charges?
It was a little bit of both. I mean, in the Battle of the Bulge, when the Germans broke through, the 3rd Armored Division was called down from Germany. So they left Germany. They had to pull out of Stolberg, Germany, drive south to the Ardennes forest, and hold the line there. The Battle of the Bulge was a lot of freezing and shivering and sort of pulling a German tactic on the Germans. Our guys really sat in ambush, and they waited, and it was sort of this war of attrition. It was almost as if, let's just get enough forces there to overwhelm the Germans and to stop this last ditch offensive of theirs. So the Battle of the Bulge was a bit unusual. After that, we're back to regular tank warfare. So the Germans are again on the defensive. We're leading the charge. We lost so many tanks in the Battle of the Bulge that we actually had to borrow Shermans back from the British to continue the war into Germany, to try to end the war. So we borrowed these tanks back, but by now the American military knew we have a real problem. We need a tank that can go toe-to-toe with the Panther or the Tiger, Germany's ultimate weapon, or even the Tiger II, an even bigger Tiger that had fought in the Battle of the Bulge and seemed impervious. So what did we do? We rushed over 20 of the new American super tank. There were 40 of them that came off the assembly line. The first 20 went to the European theater. The second 20 went to Fort Knox for testing. So this was literally an untested vehicle. The 20 that went to the European theater were going to be tested in battlefield conditions. And one of those 20 tanks was awarded to Clarence Smoyer and his crew after the Battle of the Bulge. So they came back to Germany, they're resting, they're refitting, and they get this new tank. They did a firing demonstration, and all the American tankers crowded around, and Clarence ended up shooting. They were shooting chimneys off of German houses in a flooded valley, abandoned houses, of course. And that's where they saw that this Pershing tank with a 90 millimeter gun, bigger than the Panther's gun, and with a velocity almost on par, that it could be the weapon that could change the battle. So no longer would you need to encounter a German tank and try to go around it. This was a tank that could go toe-to-toe. But as I mentioned earlier, the downside is when he got that best tank, they at first thought our lives are saved. We're going to live. We're going to survive. We've got the biggest gun on the battlefield. And then his commander said, okay, by the way, the Pershing, the only one in our company, is going to lead every attack we do. And so that's when Clarence went from playing Russian roulette to basically being on the firing line. And that's when it came to how could they wield this new weapon to change the course of battle.
Yeah, I'd like to know a little more about the Pershing just to get a sense of what Clarence was dealing with when he's leading battle. First of all, I'm guessing it's the Pershing is named after John Pershing, if I have his first name right, leader of the American Expeditionary Force in World War I. Do you know why it was named after him? And second, what were the defensive capabilities of the Pershing that made officers think it would withstand the attack if it went in first into battle?
You're certainly right. Pershing was the namesake of the tank. They had a habit of naming tanks after generals. So you had the Grant tank, you had the Lee tank. You had the Sherman, named after General Sherman, who burned Atlanta. And then you even have the Abrams. Creighton Abrams was a colonel in World War II, famous tank leader. So the 40